everyone, you're welcome back to my channel. This is Jowins Fashion Ville. In today's video, we'll be drafting a basic block for a 1-year baby girl. And if you're new to my channel, please do not forget to hit on the red subscribe button down below. If you like the video as well, kindly hit on the like button as well. And then for existing subscribers, thank you so much. I really love you guys. Okay, so I simply took note of the measurements we'll be needing to draft this basic block, which is our shoulder measurements 8 inches, the chest circumference 20 inches, the waist circumference 22, the neck width is 2 inches, the neck depth is 2 inches, and then the half length, which is from the shoulder line to the waistline, the vertical measurement is 7 inches. Okay, so on the pattern paper, what I simply did next is to establish the chest line. Well, this is not a standard. You can go ahead to establish any line, take any measurements of your choice. So I simply came down by 1 inch, okay, and then I labeled it the shoulder line. On the shoulder line, I went out by 2 inches to establish our neckline, and then from that same point, I came down by 2 inches, and then I connected the 2 points together, okay. So I'll be using my pattern curve to establish the neckline, okay. So what I simply did next was to place our shoulder measurement on the shoulder line, which is 8 inches divided by 2 is 4 inches. So I went ahead to mark 4 inches on the shoulder line, and then from that point which I marked, I came down by 0.75 to establish the shoulder slants, okay. So I'm using my measuring tape to do that. So from that point, I connected it to the neckline. Now to place our armhole line, or our armhole measurement on our pattern, my armhole measurement is 4 inches for this basic block, which is the armhole circumference divided by 2. 8 divided by 2 gave us what? 4 inches. So we'll simply place the armhole line from the shoulder slant. So from the shoulder slant, I marked what? 4 inches to establish the armhole line. Then I simply went ahead to also mark 4.75 inches from the shoulder line to establish the chest line, because the armhole measurement also establishes the chest line, okay. So accurately I did that measurement. So the next thing for us to do is to establish the armhole curve. So I simply took the midpoint of the armhole line. So that's the armhole line. The midpoint of that line is 2 inches. So from that point I went in by 0.75. so you can decide to modify yours. You can do 1 inch depending on how you want the curve to be. Then on the chest line, I went ahead to place the chest circumference divided by 4, which is quarter of our chest measurements, which is 5 inches. So I went ahead to mark 5 inches on the chest line, and I connected with 3 points together, okay. So the next thing I did was to place our waist measurements on the pattern, and then from the shoulder line to the waistline down there is 7 inches. So I went ahead to mark 7 inches from the shoulder line, and then I drew a straight line and then labeled it as well. So what I simply did next was to place our waist circumference, our waist measurement on the waistline, which is our waist circumference divided by 4. So quarter of our waist circumference is what? 5.5. So I simply went ahead to place marks 5.5 inches on the waistline, and then I connected it to the chest line. Below the waistline, I simply went ahead to add 1 inch seam allowance below. So I'll be using my measuring tape to measure 1 inch seam allowance for this pattern. And then towards the side front, I also added what? 1 inch seam allowance for this pattern as well. And then I connected it together, okay. So I simply went ahead to also add 0.5 inch seam allowance for the shoulders, and then at this point, to prevent the shoulders from sticking out, I simply went in by what? 0.5 inch seam allowance, and then I utilized it As I simply went in by 0.5 inches and then I utilized it as the seam allowance for this pattern. So I simply drew an imaginary line to establish this modification, okay? Okay, so on the neckline, I marked a seam allowance of 0.5 inches and then I connected it to the shoulder line as well. Okay guys, so this is the front part of this pattern. We'll simply go ahead to draft the basic block for the back part as well. Okay, so for the back panel, the difference between the front and the back is our zip allowance and the neckline. So I'll go ahead to establish my zip allowance of 1.5 inches and then I drew a shoulder line just like I did for the front part as well. Okay, so the next thing to simply do is to establish our neckline just like I did for the front pattern, which is 2 inches on the shoulder line, a neck width of 2 inches. So I'll simply go ahead to use my measuring tape to mark out 2 inches on the shoulder line, and then from that point I simply came down by 1 inch, rather I came down by 1 inch from the shoulder line. Then I'll connect the 2 points together. Okay, so the next thing I simply did was to place our shoulder measurement on the shoulder line, which is 8 inches divided by 2 is 4 inches. From that point I simply came down by 0.75 to establish our shoulder slant. Okay, so from that point basically I'll connect it to our neck line as well, the neck width. So to establish our armhole line, I'll place my armhole circumference divided by 2 on the pattern, which is 4 inches. And then from there, I established the chest line as well. So the next thing to do is to place the midpoint of our armhole line, which is 4 divided by 2 is what? 2 inches. So from that point, I'll connect it to our chest line. So it's not going to be as deep as the front panel. But before then, I'll simply place our chest the quarter of our chest circumference on the chest line, which is 20 divided by 4 is 5 inches. So I went ahead to mark 5 inches and then I'll connect the midpoints to the 5 inches mark on the chest line to establish our armhole curve. So after then, I went ahead to place our half length measurement, which is the waist measurement, the vertical measurement from the shoulder line, which is 7 inches. Okay, so I'll be marking 7 inches from the shoulder line. Then I'll simply go ahead to draw a straight line from that point. Okay, so after then I'll place my waist circumference on the waistline, which is 22 divided by 4. Quarter of it is what? 5.5. So I'll simply mark 5.5 inches and then I'll connect it to the chest line. Okay, so below the waistline, I marked a seam allowance of 1 inch, and then on the side fronts, a seam allowance of 1 inch as well, and then I connected the two lines together. On the shoulder, I also placed a seam allowance of 0.5 inch. Okay, this is very important to avoid any form of shortage after sewing. So then, to prevent the shoulders from sticking out, I simply went in by 0.5 inches and I'll simply utilize this excess as my seam allowance. Okay, so on the neckline I marked the seam allowance of 0.5 inches and then I connected it to the shoulder line rather. Okay, so basically this is the back part of our basic block, and that will be all for now. So I'll simply go ahead to cut out the excess pattern paper and then we'll get to see what we have done so far. Okay guys, so this is our pattern on a spread. So basically this is what it looks like on a spread, and then this is it also on fold as well. So guys, if you find our videos helpful, please do not forget to subscribe guys. See you all in my next video. Bye.